Hello, everyone, and welcome to Empower Global Coaching Ministries podcast. Be an encourager. This is your host, Clarabel Coriano, Transformational Life Coach. I am so happy you are joining us today. The second question that we have for you is knowing your love language, knowing that you feel appreciated. And this is one of the important forms of communication. If you feel appreciated, if you feel loved or respected, by knowing each other's love language, like you mentioned before, it's a very important area to know. Because sometimes we don't read minds. We don't know what the other person is feeling. So do you agree that knowing the person's love language is important? And if so, why? And how does it help with the relationship?
Well, first of all, I think it's, quite frankly, mandatory to know your love language and the love language of your significant other. There's the love language book. I actually did his needs, her needs study. It's more from a biblical perspective. And I think that I should have known, that communication was we don't do podcasts if we don't like to talk, right? But I think communication for me is wholeheartedly something my husband knows, and I think it's important. I think it ultimately is not only important, it's just, quite frankly, like I said a minute ago, necessary. You cannot have a truly successful relationship unless you know how to show love, right? Like we said a minute ago, talking about actions speaking louder than words. If I am communicating, I love you, I love you, I love you, and that is not the way that he hears I love you, then what good is it? If I speak, and I love to do recreational things with my husband. He and I have a couple of things that we just do together that really are a love language for us. And if we didn't know that about each other, he would, like, going for a walk and just talking is something that is very helpful for our relationship. And if you don't realize those things and you don't look for those things, it's a recipe for disaster.
Yes.
Because here you are trying to show someone that you love them in your love language, not theirs. So what good is it to know yours? They need to know yours, and you need to know theirs. You don't really need to, you know what I'm saying? I don't need to know that I love to communicate. I know I love to communicate. But if my spouse doesn't know it and know how I need to communicate too, it's not just I like to talk. It's I need you to pay attention to me. I need eye contact. I need all of those things in order for me to feel like I'm being heard by you, right? So there are so many different areas of love language that without truly knowing your person's desire to receive love, you're just pouring the wrong stuff into them. I'm a gift giver. I love to give gifts. My husband receives gifts from me quite frequently. I actually think gift giving has become my love language to some degree, but I keep giving him gifts. And sometimes I see gifts that I purchased for him in a drawer, and I'm like, well, he just didn't even like that, did he? It's not important to him, right? And so if we don't start to, and love languages change. They do. They change as we grow. So what might have been your love language at one stage in life could be totally different at a later stage in life, right? So it's important to always be reassessing. How am I receiving love from my spouse? And how are they receiving love from me? So I hate to be, beating a dead horse here, but if you're not communicating that stuff, how on earth are they ever going to know?
Yes, exactly. I'm glad that you brought up that, again, that balance, that you want to know how they received it and how they give it. And you also want to let them know how you give it and how you receive it, so you can have the balance. And you mentioned something very important, that as the marriage grows, so those love languages, because you're maturing. things are
Yes.
changing. If you notice, like some of the movies, some of maybe a therapy session, you will see the couples, and one of the person will say, but you don't know me. You don't know me at all I needed from you was attention, or all I
Yes.
needed from you was respect, or all I needed, because they didn't, somehow they
Right.
kind of
Right.
lost that ability to communicate
Yeah.
and know that love language and continue on growing together. So we talk about love language, fighting fear, conflict
Yes.
resolution, and mediation. So before entering a relationship or dating relationship, we should be able to discuss this with a partner, and we should be able to know how they resolve conflict and also how they remediate. Fighting fair requires setting boundaries of our
Yeah, girl, my word.
and, and how each other is expected to act during a fight in order to find solutions. Do you
Right.
agree or disagree with this, and why?
All right. So let me just make this perfectly clear to anyone who's listening. You're
Mhm,
not always right. And that is key. Okay. In
mhm,
order to really fight fair, you have to genuinely understand
mhm,
your perspective and your significant other's perspective might not be the same,
mhm,
right? Mind
mhm,
blowing. I know it's hard to believe that people don't always think the same, right?
mhm,
And that is not easy concept to for a lot of headstrong people such as
mhm,
myself to really accept sometimes. I think I one of the things that my husband and I kind of joke around about a lot is you'd mentioned this earlier, driving. I am a sinner behind the wheel. I will just be the first to admit it. I drive too fast, and my husband is like, I feel like he is Morgan Freeman in Driving Miss Daisy. You know what I'm saying? And so I constantly throw around the fact that I'm Miss Daisy and maybe we'll get there, maybe we won't, and but
mhm,
at the same time, it can be an ugly thing. It can become a
mhm,
fight between the two of us. So I've learned that I have to accept his perspective and he has to accept mine. So when we get in the car,
mhm.
whoever's driving, me personally, I'm learning. It's still a work in progress, but it's something that it can become very
Mhm,
agitating because I'm super impatient. So I'm like, that's why I drive fast because I want to get to where I'm going. I have things to do, right? I
mhm,
mean, it's not because I'm trying to be like a road rager or anything like that, but I've got
mhm,
other things I'd rather be doing than sitting in a car. And God has really worked on me on that. And ultimately, when you're wanting to fight fair, because it is important to fight fair, you're gonna fight, there's gonna be fights. If you when you start to experience that fight, if you stop, pause, and take it to God and say, okay, help me to see their perspective, God, because you love them. I love them. I don't want to fight with them. I want to be in aligned with them. Um, so that is my go-to suggestion for fighting fair is when it starts to happen, because it will.
mhm.
It, you need to remove yourself as quickly as possible, first of all. Accept the fact that you're not going to be right all the time and try to see things from their perspective, all along seeking God's direction.
Yes, I totally agree with you on that. And one of the things also that I want to highlight in terms of fighting fear is having that listening skills. You
Yes.
want to hear the person, because when two people are arguing, they're not hearing each other.
Sure.
So you want to be able to, like you said, take a breather and say, okay, now let's work on this, and not name calling, because some arguments can get out of hand, and we don't want that
Hmm.
to take it to that level. But we
Sure.
want to, again, lay those boundaries and say, okay, so I'm hearing that you're upset in your behavior, and naming the behavior of what happened, instead of, going back to back on issues. Having
Sure.
in having that agreement that we're going to work on a resolution, how we're going to work on this, how we're going to fix,
Sure.
rather than leave it and park it and say, okay, we fought, now we made up. No, how are you going to resolve it? Don't never leave nothing on the table.
Right. I got
Please,
two. I got two things. I got
go
two things.
ahead.
I got to share on that. First of all, I don't know if you could see my wrist, but James 1:19. Okay.
Mhm.
Understand this, my beloved brothers and sisters. Let everyone be quick to hear, slow to speak, and slow to anger.
Yes.
And quite frankly, that is my go-to because it is without a doubt the way God created us. Okay.
Mhm.
He created us with 2 ears, one mouth. We should be
Mhm.
listening twice as much as we speak, which is sometimes not as easy for me as I'd like to admit. But it is definitely a necessity, right?
Mhm.
For sure. For
Yes.
sure.
So the next question goes along with this one. I think it
Yes.
should have been first. How do you communicate? How do you communicate when you're angry? And because communication is a crucial part of marriage, like you mentioned,
Yes.
is if a person tends to run away from the situation instead of resolving it, that can create like what they call a snowball effect over time.
Yes.
On the
Yes.
other hand, it keeps like,
Sure.
the snowball is like piling it up, and
Yep.
then you sort of
Yep.
come back,
Right.
it hits
Sure.
you. On the other hand, if a person blows up rather than communicating, that also can be very destructive.
Yeah.
What is your take on that?
So I find that when I get mad, I have a tendency to all of a sudden I have a flow of emotion, right? So
Mhm.
I have all of these things coming to mind for me, like things that have happened in the past that I thought were over, that I
Mhm.
had let go of, but when that ugh, rises up in you, right? You start remembering, well, he doesn't do this, he doesn't do that, and I'm so mad that he can't do this. And ultimately, that is me, not him, right? That is
Mhm.
me not being able to show forgiveness. That is not me being Jesus, right? Because ultimately, if I am a member of the body of Christ, first and foremost, I have to focus on my spouse or significant other like Jesus does. And I have to accept that not everything again is the way it's going to look, okay? Because you have two people merging into one, there are
Mhm.
going to be conflicts. There are going to be times where things are, but you have got to accept that the resolution comes with Jesus,
Yes.
right? So if we take it to God first, right? I mean, that is my go-to for
Mhm.
everything. If I don't take it to God before I take it to my spouse, I can very easily find myself talking in a way that is disrespectful, non-loving, and not effective. So if I go to God first, seek his guidance and suggestions on how to deal with this particular disagreement, because like I said, it's going to happen.
Mhm.
I have, I get that sense of peace that comes over me. Okay. And then I'm able to release a lot of that anger and frustration and start to see things from my spouse's perspective.
Mhm.
And that can ultimately alter everything, right?
Yes. Yes. So you mentioned going to God for guidance, because we understand some people may struggle with their temperament. They may struggle with their temperament. They may struggle with getting
Yes.
upset.
Yes.
Some
Yes.
people experience it with more passion. With more passion. But however, when
Yes.
it's something very negative, that the anger turns very negative, we also have to be aware of that, because that is unhealthy and
Yes.
it's toxic. So we want to
Yes.
make sure that people understand that as well.
Yeah, and
Mm-hmm.
you had mentioned walking away before, and I do think there is I am not a walk awayer.
Mm-hmm.
I am a let's stay and fighter for the most part, as where my spouse, he knows, okay, I've reached my limit. Stop
Mm-hmm.
talking. I'm going away. That's how he copes.
Mm-hmm.
And understanding that that is a coping mechanism for him is important. right? You have to validate his need to move away from the situation. There's nothing wrong with that. As long as there is a time to we come back together
Mm-hmm.
and not let it get swept under the rug. And we have over time, definitely there's been times where we have let it go under the rug and then it rears its ugly head again, a little bit deeper, a little bit stronger, a little bit more painful. So when you don't get to the root of your issues, it's going to come back. So it's really, really important to always come back when the emotions have subsided, because I do think there's nothing wrong with anger. Jesus got angry.
Yes.
It's okay to get angry. I am gonna make you angry. There are times where I know I irritate the heck out of my husband, and he has every right to walk away from that, and I have to respect that, with the understanding that together we will come back at some point and rediscuss when those emotions are not what's ruling the conversation.
Thank you for sharing that. Thank you for sharing that example, because it is very important.
Yeah,
like
sure.
if you know you're not getting anywhere and the topic is just getting hotter, and the emotions, and it's stirring up a lot of other stuff, because you don't want it to stir up things like past things that happen, because then it's going to open up a can of worms. So removing yourself from that situation is the best thing to do, and then come back and get grounded and be present again to handle the situation. So thank you for sharing that. That's a really important one. Now we're going to go and speak about red flags, which I probably could have been the first one that we should have been talking about. So these are red flags that are not tolerated. They're not tolerated or accepted. And then there are some that may be workable, and we're going to clarify that to people. So according to research, there are some red flags that should be tolerated. And then there are some that might be workable, as being, as the couple may come into agreement to work on them. So what do you think about this? And what are some of the red flags to look for?
Yeah. So obviously the biggest red flag is, are you a Christian? We kind of talked about that already, right? So if we are not equally yoked and we are not aligned, how can we get aligned? And if we can't get aligned, that's the biggest red flag ever. Time to take off, find somebody else. And that's a hard thing sometimes for people. That to me is without a doubt a necessity. If you are a Christian woman and you are in a relationship with a non-Christian man, I can only encourage you to pray and see if you can, because God can do anything, right?
Yes.
But ultimately it's going to be a huge struggle, and that should be a red flag in the beginning, no matter what. There's a lot of, for me, that's really the only major red flag. Now, obviously, if you Google the person and they have a criminal history, that could be a red flag.
Yes, that's
there's plenty of things that out there that could potentially lead you away from having a relationship with somebody, right? The way they speak to I'm a full believer that if you see a man talking to his mother in disrespect, that to me is like probably one of the biggest red flags ever. If a man cannot show respect to his mother, he's not going to show respect to you. And that's a red flag to me. It always has been, it always will be. I think it's an imperative thing for men to, that is their first relationship, right? With a woman. And if they cannot respect the person who brought them into this world, they're not going to respect you.
Yes.
So, there's plenty of little things like that, but ultimately, if they are true believers in Christ, there's so much more all those red flags can be worked through. Ultimately, the biggest red flag is, where is your walk with Jesus? How highlighted is your Bible? How worn out is that Bible?
In their prayer life.
Yeah. Yes. So to me, if there is so much that can be salvaged in relationships, red flags or not, when God is at the helm. And I have learned, fortunately, I'm not that old that I've gotten to the point where I finally figured that one out. But ultimately, there is no other red flag that is as important. Even things like previous adultery, previous this, previous that. To me, ultimately, the only red flag that's really the most important is, are they truly a believer in Jesus Christ? And
Yes.
I do say truly, because there's a lot of fake Christians out there,
Mm-hmm.
and it takes a lot to really determine someone's. I mean, I don't know if you're a Christian. You say you're a Christian, but are you a Christian? I don't know
Mm-hmm.
that. That's between you and God, right? So you honestly have to have lots and lots of, again, going back to my love language, communication about it.
Mm-hmm.
Um, it's a necessity to really get deep into where is your walk with Christ. Because when you have that relationship with God,
Mm-hmm.
all things are possible, right?
Yes, definitely, definitely. You mentioned something very important about the red flags, which was, let's say, for instance, the person is not so new being a Christian, but had a past, but they were able to share, okay, listen, when I was in the world, this is who I was, this is what
Yeah.
I did.
Yeah. Absolutely.
As long as the person is demonstrating a different character,
Hmm.
demonstrating that they're a changed person, and demonstrating that their relationship with God is first and foremost priority, and that
Right.
they're doing everything that they need to have that personal relationship with God, because anybody can say they're Christian, like you mentioned.
Sure. Sure.
So them that might be workable, but when somebody, like you said, hides a criminal history or demonstrate those traits that mistreating people or a history of domestic violence or anything like that, then that's a red flag. Because
Yes.
unless they
Yeah.
go to intensive therapy or counseling, that's a
Right.
big red flag. Um,
Right.
and also,
And I think
mhm,
I think it really boils down to um not being in a place of judgment. I'm not in a place
yes.
of judgment. I
Hmm.
can't judge someone else's
Hmm.
walk with Christ. I just can't. I'm not, I'm a sinner just like everybody else,
Like everybody
you
else.
know? And I've made mistakes in my life that I have received forgiveness from, and I can walk strong in my
Hmm.
relationship with Jesus Christ today because I know I am forgiven,
Hmm.
but I'm not, but so I'm not in this place of judgment. I can't, I just can't. And
Hmm.
I can't judge you for your past. I'm looking at who you are today.
Today, yes.
Yes, for sure. And how are you showing me that you are a child of the Most High God?
Hmm. It's a good one.
Yeah.
Very good.
Yeah.
Yes, because you want to see that change behavior.
Heck yeah.
You
Heck
know,
yeah.
you want to see that
Yeah.
change behavior.
Yeah.
And we're
And
not saying to go in with that approach. Like you said, you have to go with good intentions,
sure.
not judgmental.
Yeah.
Um, Again, because there's very fragile individuals out there.
Sure.
And
Sure.
we have to, put on that mind of Christ, how God will handle that. And, but
Right.
you cannot shortchange yourself. You also cannot settle for less. And what we're trying to encourage people is to be prepared,
Yes.
to be
Yes.
prepared and know how to ask those questions and know how to it's a part of getting to know each other anyways.
Yes.
Because you
Yes.
should, again, like you mentioned, you're not just going to stay in the honeymoon phase,
Right.
or the
That would be, again, that would be
butterflies and
awesome, but it doesn't
everything.
happen.
It doesn't. I believe how long does it take? I think about a few months. When that whole red roses colored glasses come off,
Yes.
then you start seeing the flaws. That's when the head bumping starts. And so you
And
want
that's
to
when
come
people
in,
usually start walking away. That's when they start
yes,
looking for something better.
and people quit
Yeah.
before
And
giving the relationship a chance to, because
right.
they
Right.
fail to ask those questions at the beginning, or they fail to come in with a mindset, okay, I'm dating but for marriage. Because
Yes.
let me tell you, the serial daters,
Yes. There's lots
dating
of those
has
out there.
become a second job to
Yeah.
some people.
Yeah. Yes.
And
Yes,
they
it
know
is.
how to say the right things, they know how to ask you the right things, and it
Right.
just becomes a mind manipulation game, we
Yes.
don't want
Yes.
that. You want to skip that. Scratch that part.
Absolutely.
you
Absolutely.
know
That the
um
I like to call them the love con men. I just think that they're just looking for somebody to play, and
yes,
we don't have. I'm too old for that. I don't have time for
yes,
that.
definitely.
Yeah. I mean,
I mean, I,
and we've all. I think we've all kind of been there at
Hmm.
stages in our life where we have, only been looking for this, only
Hmm.
been looking for that.
Hmm.
And it is really important to determine what are you looking for in this relationship. And again, it all goes
Hmm.
back to just asking, just talking
Yes.
it out and trying to figure out. So if you are in a relationship where you are not communicating your needs and you are not meeting the needs of your spouse, then by God, communicate. That
Hmm.
is that is just where it's at for me. If you cannot find the ways to communicate, seek counsel, seek
Hmm.
counsel through God or seek counsel through actual counseling. Because I do agree, an outside individual looking in can really inspire change.
Yes, definitely, definitely. And it's just not one person going to counseling. It has to be both,
Yes.
so they both
Yeah.
can learn together how to handle things.
Yeah.
Because we see a lot of marriages when they, especially the females, we
Yeah.
tend to be the first one who initiate going to therapy or going to counseling because
Sure.
sometimes we kind of like, I want to know, like, what am I doing wrong? Maybe it's me, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
And
Right.
sometimes it's not us.
Yeah.
It's the person are willing to change, and if the person is not willing to work in a therapy, that means that they have given up in the marriage, probably perhaps a very long time ago, but they
Yes.
never mention it. So we
Yes.
don't want to be dragging ourselves to years and years of in bad toxic relationship. God doesn't want that
Correct.
for us, or relationship that are violent. We want to be in healthy, productive relationship, and this is why we're having this discussion. And that goes to my next question, which is your as a role model and Christian mentor, how do you encourage all the listeners who are listening to this podcast today? Any words of encouragement for those who are beginning to date, that want to find the right partner and not make mistakes? We're bound to make mistakes, but not make as many. How?
Right. Right. Well, I think we've kind of touched on it. You probably are going to know the answer to this. God first,
Mm,
communicate second. And I think you have to be willing to concede that
mm.
you're not always right. And I think those are like the main things that help me flourish in my marriage. And I think it can help anyone flourish in their marriage when they choose to focus their attention first and foremost to God.
Thank you. Thank you for the great words of
Yeah.
encouragement.
Yeah.
Yes, definitely know when to wait that white flag and say,
Yes.
okay, I want to keep the peace,
Yes.
you
Yep.
know, and
Yep.
very important, God first in the relationship, and let it, continue on as you're growing in the
Sure.
marriage. Very
Sure.
important. I am so honored to have you in this podcast and in this conversation. It was
Too.
amazing. It was
I enjoyed it immensely.
awesome. And whenever you want to come back, just let me know.
Oh, I will. I had a blast. I enjoy you very much.
Thank you, thank you, thank
Yeah,
you so much.
sure thing.